For decades, an unknown organization around the world was engaged in cleaning people's blood, after which it became known all over the world. After what happened, people needed to be very careful on the street. And if someone noticed strange activity of people who could drink blood, it was necessary to report it immediately. But the hero believed that this was very unfair towards people like him. He was one of those who drank blood. Therefore, such people suffered greatly because they were often beaten and mocked. Therefore, it was necessary to be careful. Vampires tried to calm themselves and be optimistic. After all, they believed that soon, vampires would be able to establish power over the whole world and establish their domination. The main character was pale. He tried to hide his appearance and do everything so that people would not find out about his origin. He wore special teeth, which helped him drink blood. They were very convenient and it was his personal weapon. 10 years had passed and now, the world was not calm. The main character was constantly at home, and his aunt decided to stay with him because she saw that he was not feeling very well. She decided to go into his room but did not even suspect what danger awaited her there. The guy was in his room and drank blood from live mice. She was so scared that her phone fell out of her hands and broke. With a trembling voice, the woman called his name. And the boy, who did not expect to see her, was also very scared. She knew that something strange was happening to her son, so, trying to calm him down, she began to hug him. The boy could not help himself, so he asked for forgiveness for what had happened. She offered him to drink his own blood because he was hungry. He understood that he was a monster, so he asked to kill him right now. At that moment, the woman realized that it was too late, because the changes were irreversible. She did not want to leave him, so she offered her own blood again. She showed him her neck, which was the most favorite place of vampires. Tears appeared in his eyes because he understood that he had hurt her. Meanwhile, an unknown man was climbing up to his house, and Yueshu could no longer restrain himself. The temptation was too great, so, feeling hungry, he bit his own mother and began to drink her blood. The doorbell started ringing in his apartment. But quickly, the man realized that the door to the apartment was open. The man realized that something terrible had happened, and he might be late. And when he entered the apartment, he saw a large number of bats that were everywhere. Suddenly, he heard the terrible screams of a woman in the next room, and he saw how, crying, the guy apologized to the woman who had lost consciousness. The man realized that he was late and did not have time to save her. His father did not understand why Yueshu did this. Now the woman was dead, and he realized that his son was, in fact, a monster. But even now, he could not calm down. After all, he felt that he was not enough and he was still hungry. And now, unable to control himself, he was going to throw himself at his own father. He wanted to kill him because he could no longer control himself. The man understood that it was impossible to stop him. The only thing he was capable of was to kill the monster that was in front of him and was his son. After all, this was the only way to survive, because in this state the vampire could no longer control himself. The father swung and was going to strike and kill him. And so, with one strong movement, he cut off his head. It was the end, because now his son was also dead. In one day, the unfortunate man lost his family. His wife died before his eyes, and he himself killed his son. When it was all over, bats began to leave his apartment. The man hated himself for not coming home earlier. After all, his own son had taken everything he had. He bent over the body of his dead wife and asked for forgiveness. At this time, he completely forgot about the boy's head, which was lying on the ground. But in fact, he was not dead. After what happened, the police arrived at the scene and began evacuating the population from the house. His father, Sheng-Shi, worked for a company that cleaned the blood of the population. Now, he was trying to understand how his son became a vampire, and for this, he was going to take a sample of his blood. There were no bite marks on his body, which meant that he had somehow become infected. For analysis, his head was placed in a special bag. The father had never noticed anything strange in his behavior and did not understand how this could happen. It seemed that everything was much more serious than they thought. Therefore, it was urgent to start their own investigation to understand how quickly the virus was spreading. Meanwhile, at the other end of the city, a stranger was sitting in a restaurant. The girl, who was smiling kindly at him, was ready to accept his order. But when she saw him, she was very scared and froze in place. After all, in front of her was a real vampire who only wanted her blood for the order. Meanwhile, the results of his blood analysis came in. According to them, the guy was a new blood, which meant that his body already had a deadly infection. Now everyone understood that the changes that had occurred to his body were irreversible. Suddenly, Sheng-Shi got a call. He was told about what happened in the local cafe. A new vampire appeared in the city, so they rushed to the challenge to have time to detain him. The soldiers from the Federation had been preparing for a long time and knew that sooner or later the virus would no longer be contained. But they did not even think that everything could happen so quickly. The man who was in the morgue was trying to find the body of the main character. He began to take it out of the capsule. The man was going to resurrect him and believed that the guy should be grateful to him for this. He was going to do this because he himself was a vampire, and soon the guy will wake up and live. A long time ago, there was a legend about a girl who was cursed and became a vampire. She did not want to kill people, so she was helpless and starving. The population was afraid of her, but still decided to accept and let her live with them all. And suddenly, one day, a hunter came to the settlement, and everything changed. He was a vampire hunter and was looking for people like her. The girl constantly protected the village from them and drove them away. That night, the hunters told the people about how dangerous vampires were. After all, sooner or later, they would start killing people. Suddenly, the ceiling in her house collapsed and bright sunlight penetrated her home. These were hunters who tried to kill her, but the offended girl decided to take revenge because she could not stand it anymore. She began to bite everyone who came close to her. Meanwhile, the main character woke up and realized that he was still alive. He could not understand how this happened, but he noticed a strange man in front of him. He explained that he had performed an ancient ritual and was able to resurrect him. And as long as he wears a special collar from his mother's eye, he will live. He urgently needed to leave the house because when his father sees him, he will kill him. The man helped him because he promised his mother to do this when she was alive. The only way to create a collar that would save his life was to use the bones and organs of a living person. And his father witnessed such a murder and understood what it was really for. Now that everything was ready, the man's mission was complete. However, the goal was not achieved because there was one more step left. The man tried to be neutral and did not consider himself either to humans or to vampires. But he believed that one day they would have their own world, in which they would be the masters. Suddenly, an explosion occurred. The police building was blown up. People who were lucky enough to survive, in panic, began to leave the house. They could not understand what was really happening. Meanwhile, the police were trying to find the vampire they had just seen with their own eyes. Suddenly, they saw that their colleague had been bitten and was dead. The vampire that attacked him was incredibly fast. They tried to spot him, but nothing worked. Suddenly, Xiangxia froze in place and could not move. After all, just now, he saw the enemy in front of him. Now the vampire was going to bite him, and he was ready to attack the man and taste his blood. Xiangxia tried to fight back and managed to hit him directly in the head. But the only chance to kill a vampire is to cut off his head. So he did it, and his head was lying on the ground. In fact, his colleague saved his life. After all, he managed to strike in time, which prevented the vampire from biting him. He saw how Xiangxia was very nervous and could not gather his strength. So he let him rest, because he knew that now he was going through very difficult times. In addition, they could save the girl who was trying to attack the vampires. But she was lucky, because there was only a small scratch on her body. Suddenly, a newcomer came to the crowd. But the girl seemed to know him. Xiangxia didn't understand what had happened and why the newcomer was so scared. Huya knew that it was Shu Chen in front of her. The guy was very confused and scared. He told her about the explosion that had occurred at the police station and that they were trying to put out the fire. The man couldn't believe what had happened and immediately decided to go there. They ran and ordered him to stay to watch over the girl. The police confirmed that the explosion had occurred at the morgue, but they couldn't determine the cause yet. He was also told that his son's body had been damaged in the explosion. And now the man couldn't understand why all these events happened right now. Meanwhile, the guy tried to examine her wound and help. She was in pain, but he tried his best to stop the bleeding. Huya hadn't seen him for a long time, so now she wanted to know how he managed to get here. But the guy had wanted to meet her for a long time, in order to tell her everything in person. He just wanted to protect her, but the girl refused because she believed that she could take care of herself. Suddenly, Shu Chen received a call from someone. He was told that a new unknown anomaly had appeared in the central area of the city, so he was ordered to go there. The guy apologized and explained that he should have left her. She blushed, but wished him to take care of himself. After all, she was worried about him and knew what a dangerous job he had. The guy promised that he would be careful and left. And the girl who stayed was once again convinced that he really liked to talk. Meanwhile, the man approached the house in which the anomaly was noticed. At the same time, he wrote to the girl that he would return soon and everything would be fine. He tried to inspect the house, but realized that it was clean and there was no one there. But suddenly, he heard a strange sound in the house. It seemed that he was coming from the basement that he saw in front of him. The guy started going down and heard that the sounds from the basement were only getting stronger. It was very dark there, so he started shining a flashlight. But even that didn't help, so despite this, he started going down. In addition, there were a lot of bats in the basement that started flying out of there. He started screaming because he hoped that someone was there. Suddenly, he saw an unknown person who was in the basement. And suddenly, he realized that it was a vampire who was drinking blood from his victim. The guy realized that he had a real monster in front of him. The vampire was surprised when he saw him because he did not expect that anyone would be able to find him. It was Yue Shi who had abandoned his victim, from whom he had drunk all the blood, and began to move in his direction. The vampire understood that he was the only witness, therefore he needed to be eliminated. Despite his fear, the hero was not going to retreat and was ready to use his weapon. Shu Chen warned him not to let the vampire get close. He took out his sword and was ready to kill him. He blamed the vampires for all the crimes that had been happening in the city recently. After all, there had been a lot of deaths in which they were involved. And now he was ready to strike. He swung his own sword. But suddenly the vampire, with his bare hand, stopped his attack. Shu Chen didn't understand how he managed to do this. He underestimated the enemy, who was much stronger than ordinary criminals. Now he tried to strike back. And the boy tried to hold on, however. He understood that the enemy was very strong. They moved in circles and the vampire continued to hold his weapon. He told that people were much more cruel than them. After all, he saw with his own eyes how they killed. Even his father killed his own daughter. Gradually, he began to bring the sword closer to the boy's neck, and the boy understood that he simply risked dying at his hands. In the end, the vampire accused people of all the crimes they committed against them, and with one swing of the sword cut off his head and killed the guy. He tried to avenge all his brothers who died at the hands of people. The girl looked at his photo and could not even think that a guy like Shu Chen would join the Federation and open a vampire hunt. She wrote to him and waited for a response. But she could not even think that now he was dead and would not write to her anymore. The vampire looked at his dead body. After that, he began to search him. He found his rank badge of the Purifier Federation and realized that Shu Chen was a rookie. After all, he had a low rank. But even that didn't stop him from enjoying his death. Yusha wanted to get closer to his father, but for that, he needed to disguise himself. Therefore, he decided to do it and started to tear off his head. He wanted revenge because his father killed him and his sister. Yusha couldn't understand how his father could be capable of such a thing and what made him kill his own relatives. He took the dead boy's head and was going to use it. After all, this was the only chance to disguise himself and get close to his father and remain unnoticed. And taking the dead boy's head, he tried to plant it in his own body. And suddenly, the eye on his neck began to glow. He felt that he was now closer to his father. In addition, he decided to take his clothes so that the disguise would be reliable. Taking his phone, he saw a notification on the phone. It was the girl who had written to him a few minutes ago. He stared at her photo for a long time because her face seemed very familiar to him. Still, he decided to answer. There were a lot of bats inside again, but he didn't understand how they got here. In addition, a bright light appeared that caught his attention. The bats were circling around the bright light, and it immediately caught his attention. He tried to touch the source of light. Carefully and very slowly, he began to approach so as not to scare them. With each step, the light became brighter and brighter. And now, the vampire was shocked because he had never seen it before. Suddenly, the light became so bright that he had to cover his face. It blinded him. In the meantime, the fire was extinguished. At the crime scene, rescuers found vampire teeth and knew that they were involved in what happened. In addition, this was not all that was found. One body was missing from the morgue. It simply disappeared somewhere. The chief realized that one of their colleagues could be a vampire, and he blamed Sheng Shi for this, who missed this moment. Suspicions were on a tall guy who always behaved very strangely. In addition, now they were trying to find out if the corpse had disappeared as a result of the fire. Many of the corpses were burned, so it took time to identify them. Moreover, the cause of the explosion could not be established. Meanwhile, the main character realized that he could have memories from two people at the same time. When he was about to leave, he saw an unknown man on his way who greeted him. He drew attention to his appearance and claws, which could scare people. Even he himself was a little scared after seeing him. Yusha didn't know who was in front of him because he had never seen him before. As it turned out, it was Agunuo in front of him who had appeared to protect him. After all, he was the chosen one, and now he needed to be protected. He explained that the boy looked very bad and attracted attention. Therefore, if the officers noticed him, they would immediately try to kill him. He tried to explain that the boy should focus and think about how to protect himself. However, according to him, he didn't understand much. Aguno tried to calm him down, to examine his hand. Meanwhile, Huya was very worried about the boy, so therefore she decided to come to his house to see him again. Before, she often visited his parents because they were friends. His mother seemed scared, but when she saw her, she let him in. Inside was his father. They were all waiting for their own son, who hadn't returned home for a long time. Hoya didn't expect him to want to join the Federation. His mother tried to dissuade him because the job was very dangerous and difficult, but he never obeyed. His father seemed very tense and kept quiet all the time. After all, his son was an adult and had already made his choice, so they couldn't influence and change his decision. The woman turned to Huya and asked him to protect her son from danger. After all, if something happened to him and if he died, they wouldn't be able to live peacefully. There were rumors that many people from the Federation had died in the past day and many vampires had been seen. Meanwhile, the boy left the house and went outside. He immediately attracted the attention of the people because of his appearance. In his hands was a button that he could use to call all the people from the Federation. In order not to draw attention to himself, he thought about how he could remove the claws from his hands. However, he didn't even notice that he was being watched the whole time. And the unknown man knew that everything was going according to plan now. He was going to the cafe to meet his bodyguard. He was already waiting for him inside and was happy to see him. Aguno couldn't believe that he would come to him so quickly. The main character tried to find out why he was the chosen one. Agunuo said that once in his childhood he put on vampire teeth. Hearing this, Yueshu was amazed because how could he know about this? And suddenly, he began to remember how in his childhood he really played this game all the time. The man told him that in fact, vampire blood flowed in those toy teeth, which now flowed in his veins, and it was then that he got this infection. Although it sounded very absurd, but in fact, it was exactly like that. Golden blood flowed in his veins, so he was the chosen one. Moreover, he found the teeth right on the street and put them in his mouth. And, without even expecting it, he didn't notice how he turned into a monster. Realizing this, the boy started to cry because now he lost his teeth and realized that he had made a terrible mistake. He didn't want to be like that anymore, because he realized that because of this, he caused a lot of pain to his parents. He wanted to turn everything back and get rid of his curse. But Aguno couldn't help him and change anything. In addition, he knew that the boy wanted to take revenge on his own father. In fact, he wanted the main character to help him. But Yuesha didn't understand why exactly he should help him. The guard promised to help him too. After all, it was he who could give him the power that would allow him to defeat his father and take revenge, because he definitely wouldn't be able to do it alone. But before answering, he wanted to make a deal with the boy. However, now he needed to go, and he left the boy alone and gave him time to think about his proposal. He told him about the house of a man to whom he could turn when he had problems. After all, he understood that having memories from two different people could be very problematic. The boy remembered how his father brutally killed his sister. He asked him to stop, but he didn't listen and did it right in front of him. Then he realized that his father was a real monster. And then he became an enemy for him whom he promised to take revenge on when he became an adult. Meanwhile, the events moved to the main headquarters of the Purifier Federation. The men learned that the missing body belonged to Shengshi's son. But at first, no one believed it, because it was simply impossible at first glance. However, Zhang Boyuan was convinced that there could be no mistake because all the data was checked several times. So maybe someone else took the boy's body away? But the chief had a suspect in what happened. He suspected a man with long white hair who tried to deny the fact that the boy's body had simply disappeared. But he was excited by such an accusation because he had been watching the boy since childhood. However, the father could not listen to this anymore because he was tired. He believed that now was not the time to discuss what had happened because the problem needed to be solved somehow. To find out everything, they wanted to check the cameras, but they were damaged as a result of the explosion. Now they had no way to find out what really happened that day. In addition, they could not restore copies of the files that the cameras could make. Therefore, now they had no evidence to find out who was involved in what really happened. This investigation was probably the most difficult of those they had ever investigated. Therefore, regardless, it was necessary to continue to find out at least something. At this, their meeting was over. But suddenly, Shengshu was approached by his employee. He told him that a minister was waiting for him, who wanted to see him. It became clear that the medicines they had ordered were now in their possession. Many scientists had been working on the medicines, and finally, they had them in their hands. This time, the tests were very good and everything seemed to work out. They had been researching vampires and had long known how to kill them. The only way was to cut off their heads, but even that wasn't easy to do. So now, they were tearing off parts of his body to see how he would react to it. But the drug was going to change everything. He injected it into the captive's body and he started screaming in pain. They considered their drug to be their greatest discovery. After all, they saw how much pain the vampire was in after the injection. He screamed and slowly began to die. After a few minutes, only a skeleton remained of him. The doctors who watched everything that was happening were amazed. After all, it worked now. The drug had proven its effectiveness. The officers were satisfied with their work and the weapons they now had. Meanwhile, there was a knock on the white-haired man's office. She was allowed inside. The girl told me that nets had been installed in the laboratories. They were needed to catch criminals and escapees. But the girl thought that this was not enough. She wanted to install a net also at the main entrance. However, the man refused because he thought that this was not necessary. However, he ordered to strengthen the security at the entrance to the base, which was very important. After that, the girl left. But suddenly, in the corridor, she saw Sheng Yi. He wanted to know what she was doing here, but the girl only looked at him silently. Meanwhile, the Federation employee was returning to his house, but he did not even expect that they were already waiting for him at home. His entire family was captive. His son, daughter, and wife were tied up and held by force in their own house. In addition, a woman was sitting in the room waiting for his appearance. It was Coco, and she was happy when she realized that the man had returned. And when he opened the door, he was very scared because he was not prepared for what he saw. She smiled and greeted him. Coco was going to blackmail him and wanted to ask him a favor in order to let his family go. The man agreed to listen to her and wanted to know what she really wanted. But she calmed him down because she was only here to ask him a few questions. She was curious about why they had opened such a cruel hunt for vampires like her. The man didn't answer anything, and at that time he pressed a button to call his colleagues from the Federation. The man denied his guilt and convinced her that he really didn't know anything. However, Coco didn't believe a word he said. Vampires had a different smell from humans, and that was how they could navigate. Right in front of him, she began to threaten his son with death because his blood tasted so delicious. The man started screaming and begging her to stop and not do this. Meanwhile, Shengshi was walking to the laboratory, and when he saw what happened, he couldn't believe his eyes. After all, there was a skeleton in front of him, and he couldn't understand what really happened here. Chayi reassured him because this was just the beginning. The girl who came up to him stopped him. After all, she was afraid that he might say a lot of unnecessary things. However, she told him that for a very long time they had been trying to come up with a weapon against vampires. Therefore, they made a potion that caused corrosion when it got into their blood and was forced with it. The man was convinced that because of this, their combat effectiveness could decrease significantly. However, the minister was convinced that they should simply add the potion to their bullets. Then, they no longer needed to risk their own lives and try to cut off the vampire's head. It was enough to simply hit the vampire and injure him so that he would slowly begin to die. And this meant that it was necessary to make weapons first. The minister was angry with the man because he dared to criticize him and disagree with his opinion. And suddenly, the girl intervened in his conversation and ordered the minister to stop and be quiet. A quarrel began between them because the minister thought that she had gone too far and had no right to talk to him like that. Shengshi called the central zone and was going to go there right now. Meanwhile, an emergency notification sounded. It concerned all employees who worked and were in the central area. A vampire was spotted in one of the central areas of the city. Therefore, it was necessary to urgently go to the scene. It concerned the girl Coco, who attacked the family of one of the employees. Suddenly, the door to his house broke. The man saw and breathed a sigh of relief because help came very quickly. Coco did not understand how this could happen. Shengshi saw in front of her a vampire girl who was of a high level. But she was not scared, but only rejoiced when she realized that she could kill more people. Meanwhile, a new explosion sounded in the city and panic began. The officers who arrived at the scene ordered everyone to flee. One of the women, who was not going to flee, stood in the middle of the street. The man turned to her, but she bit him. His hand was injured, and the man began to bleed. In front of him were two vampires who were determined to kill the officers. In addition, they were also very strong and had a high level. Meanwhile, Coco tried to attack Shengshi, but he managed to dodge the first blow. However, this was not all she was capable of and wanted to fight him until she won. The girl blamed the people for the war they had started, because trying to kill the vampires was a big mistake. In the end, she considered them cowards who were incapable of winning. She tried to hurt him again, and began to destroy the walls of the house. Coco wanted to destroy the apartment and bury the man under the rubble. Meanwhile, the vampires on the street began to fight with the officers. The vampire boy managed to kill the officer who tried to cut off his head. The others realized that these vampires were not simple. However, they could not retreat, and one of them began to attack him. The vampire tried to attack him again, but this time the man managed to protect himself and survive. The battle continued. All the man's allies were dead. He was left alone against strong enemies. The vampire was interested in fighting him because the officer was also a second level. However, despite this, he pierced his body and killed the officer. Suddenly, the main character arrived at the scene and saw that he was late again. After all, everyone was dead. The girl saw the main character and also wanted to kill him. The officer, who was still alive, asked to call someone for help because she was too strong for him. Yuishi stood silently and did not dare to say a word. The vampires began to surround him and began to decide who could kill him. After all, they wanted to kill him together. The vampire guy wanted to take his life, but in order not to argue, they decided to do it quickly. Yushai understood that he was in mortal danger. After all, he had never seen anything like this before. Suddenly, an explosion sounded and the main character was under the rubble. The vampire was satisfied with his work and was sincerely glad that he had killed his first person for today. However, soon the dust began to disperse, and the vampire realized that Yuesha was still alive. Moreover, he was not going to give up. And just at that moment, he wanted to attack the girl and kill her. He stood straight, holding a sword in his hands. Now he no longer disguised himself and was not afraid to show his enemies who he really was. They were happy when they saw that he was one of them. He thought that now they had a new ally. But it was not so at all. After all, Yuesha was determined and was going to raise his level, because killing vampires with skills gave 10 times more gold points. Therefore, approaching the enemy, he struck a powerful blow. With one swing of his own sword, he managed to cut off his head. Now he was left alone with the girl. She understood that he was really one of them. But why did he attack the guy then? And why didn't he smell like ordinary vampires then? Now, she didn't understand who he really was and what danger he was hiding. She felt sorry for her dead boyfriend. The officer who witnessed what was happening could not believe his own eyes. However, his life did not last long. After all, the main character approached and brutally killed him. He silently looked at his dead body and understood that he was a witness because of which he could have problems. As a result of the battle between Coco and Sheng Shi, the entire house was destroyed. However, she, as before, tried to kill her husband. He managed to survive and escape from the rubble. But now Coco was going to leave him. After all, she was waiting for the moment when they would meet again and then she would kill him. Meanwhile, the father freed his children. He examined them and saw on his own body a trace of the wound. The man couldn't believe his eyes because it meant that now his son was infected. Meanwhile, the vampire girl tried to talk to the main character. She approached him and complimented him a lot. She just wanted to win him over and do everything possible to make him join her. Suddenly, other officers appeared who arrived unannounced. They couldn't understand why the guy was just standing there and doing nothing. And when the girl saw him, she smiled. After all, they were old enemies and met very often. Once, she held him captive and cruelly abused him. Vampires knew that people were trying to make a deadly weapon against them. Therefore, she tried to find out all the information, and in the end, the man could not stand it and told everything. As a result of the interrogation, he lost his ear and suffered very badly. Now she tried to find out where the laboratory was located, but he did not know this, so he could not answer. Because of this, she was going to punish him again. And therefore, she made him eat his own ear. Seeing her, the man remembered everything and began to tremble with fear. Scar tried to calm him down and called him a coward. The girl recognized Scar because he was the one who saved his life last time. And so, now, she was going to take revenge on him for not being able to kill him last time. Now, she began to approach Scar and delivered a strong blow which he blocked. But this time, she was going to fight with all her might, and it became clear that defeating her would not be so easy. But even these intimidations did not scare Scar because he was also very strong. Her body began to mutate. The sword that appeared from her hand was very sharp and had taken more than one life. She was going to deliver a strong and powerful blow. However, the man managed to dodge and only received a scratch on his cheek. However, this did not stop him. Therefore, he hit her with his knee right in the stomach. He pushed her away from him because he didn't let anyone touch his face. The vampire understood that since their last meeting, he had become much stronger. Taking advantage of the moment, the main character was going to leave. After all, he understood that his father could be somewhere nearby. Therefore, he wanted to try to find him. Meanwhile, the man was trying to get his family out of the house, where it was very dangerous. Suddenly, he saw Sheng Shi in front of him. He knew that there was a wound on his son's neck. The man tried to deny it because it meant that he had to be killed. The boy understood everything and started crying. The parents knelt down and begged him to leave the boy alive and not kill him. However, it was impossible to convince him. He swung his sword and prepared to strike. Suddenly, he remembered how he had killed his own children with his own hands. Therefore, the man was merciless and killed the boy who was not guilty of anything. His father started screaming and crying because he had died right in front of his eyes. Suddenly, the main character appeared in the apartment, who witnessed what was happening. And now, he was once again convinced that his father was a monster who would not stop. As a child, he dreamed of being like his father because this profession was very noble. Even then, he noticed that something very strange was happening to his sister. After all, she began to drink blood and kill living animals. Their bodies were lying around the apartment. The girl understood that this was not right, but she could not restrain herself. Feeling hungry, she tried to drink her own blood and hurt herself. But she understood that if her father found out, he would immediately kill her. She dreamed of the day when humans and vampires would no longer be enemies, but would live in peace. Therefore, the sister, feeling that she would soon die, ordered the boy to run away from home and return only after nightfall. Remembering her, tears appeared in his eyes. He could not believe that his father could be so cruel. He did not understand why he killed the boy because he was just a child and did not harm him in any way. Shang-Chi apologized because he simply had no other choice. Suddenly, the main character decided to stand up for the girl because he was simply infected, and it was not a fact that in the future he could become a murderer. Shang-Chi could not believe that the newcomer dared to speak to him like that. And the guy continued, he believed that it was not possible to kill people who were not guilty of anything so easily. After all, they could be tried to be cured. Meanwhile, the battle continued. Scar tried to injure her, but she blocked his strong blow. He only injured her so her shirt tore. Not for long, she had to retreat. She lowered her sword and covered her naked body and chest. After that, she was going to attack the man again and try to kill him. Suddenly, he lost his vigilance because he looked at her naked body. Taking advantage of this, she dealt a strong blow. The vampire managed to cut off his hand. In addition, his partner was very scared, and he was not going to help him because he could not control himself. She almost cut off his head, but the man managed to catch her sword with his teeth. Zhang Boyuan just watched what was happening, and the man could not stand it anymore. He tried to hold on, but with every second she only pressed harder. Zhang Boyuan did not understand what to do, but he could not control himself. Once upon a time, they were left alone with him. He wondered how such a deep scar appeared on his face. Then, the main one admitted that he made it himself. He did this in order not to forget that once he was a coward and could not save his grandmother, who saved him. She sacrificed her own life for him. After all, his grandmother was the one who tried to restrain vampires with all her might so that they could not establish their own domination in the world. And he could just watch as they killed her. And it was after that incident that he decided to become tougher and stronger. Now he himself found himself in his grandmother's place, and he tried with all his might to hold on. However, he understood that he now had no chance to win, and now she wanted to know what his blood tasted like. However, Zhang Boyuan could no longer stand aside and do nothing. Therefore, he dared to engage in battle with her. He stood holding a weapon and wanted to protect his boss, who was seriously injured. The vampire began to smile. After all, she still remembered his face and how she cut off his ears. But her words did not scare the man, and he decided to help him this time. After all, he did not want to repeat his mistakes and be like a coward. Meanwhile, the main character stood opposite his father. His words really angered the man, who could not stand criticism in his direction. After all, he believed that infected people could not be saved, because sooner or later, they would lose control of their bodies. But the boy he killed was just a child and did nothing wrong. Shang-Chi began to scream because he did not want the newcomer to teach him. The main character could no longer stand his own father. He gathered his strength and rushed at him. He wanted to take revenge, but underestimated his strength. After all, the man easily dodged his blow. In addition, with all his strength, he hit him in the stomach, which made his breathing intermittent. Shang-Chi accused him of being very naive and stupid because he knew nothing. All the infected suffered. And the people from the Federation never gave up searching for a cure and always tried to find it. But there are only more vampires. People have always tried to live with them in peace and cooperate together. But the vile vampires were liars, and because of them, nothing worked. Moreover, he believed that vampires had no right to live in the world, along with humans. The man who lost his son before his own eyes simply could not calm down. He understood that the most precious thing was taken away from him, his only son. Meanwhile, Zhang Boyuan tried to strike, but the girl managed to dodge his attack. She jumped up and was able to remain unharmed. Now, she was in an advantageous position and was going to strike back. Therefore, she severely wounded the guy in the shoulder and pierced his body. She cut his left arm. The man began to scream in pain, but even despite the severe wound, he was not going to run away. His commander ordered him to escape and leave him. However, he did not obey and decided to fight to the very end, realizing that his chances were very small. He did not want to give up and tried to strike. However, due to blood loss, his body was weakening and the blows were not so effective. The vampire tore his body and cut it into pieces. The guy understood that this was the end, and the wounded leader only watched in horror as he died. Before his death, he decided to confess that in fear of death, he told everything to the vampires. And now, they knew about the location of their secret laboratory. He felt very sorry for him. And at that very moment, she cut off his head. Now the man was dead. The girl brutally killed him. Support did not have time to arrive at the scene. After all, now, the best warrior of the Federation was dead, and the leader was mortally wounded. The soldiers were shocked by what they saw, and they realized that the enemies in front of them were very strong. After all, even the best officers could not stop them. And in the meantime, the girl was going to escape, leaving them alone with the bodies of their dead comrades. In order to save the man, it was necessary to call doctors. There was no point in chasing the girl, because even together, they would not be able to defeat her. They were disappointed because many people died today. Having collected the wounded, they went to their base. Summing up, the men realized that they had suffered a defeat that day. The bodies of the dead people were going to be buried. In addition, they tried to find out where the main character's body had disappeared to and who had kidnapped him. However, the man who was in charge of the search was now dead. Therefore, they had no evidence to find him. Shang-Chi couldn't stop thinking about Coco's words, because soon the vampires would prepare a gift for the humans. Meanwhile, the main character was sitting alone on the bench. He looked at the button he was holding in his own hands. Still, he decided to go for the deal that Egu Nuo was offering him. Therefore, that evening, he decided to meet him. It seemed that he had made up his mind, and Egu Nuo understood this. Now he had to change his mind, infiltrate the secret laboratory, and steal Akashi's spirit. Akashi was a vampire who used to fight humans. However, humans betrayed her and burned her body alive. However, her soul was alive, and now humans kept her in their basements. She would inhabit human bodies, and after a while, they could turn into vampires. But without her spirit, the number of high-level vampires would decrease. Ordinary vampires posed no threat to humans and were easily killed by officers. Only high-level vampires were effective and could fight humans. While humans stole Akashi's spirit, vampires stopped attacking them. Now, the vampires didn't want to take any risks because their number of fangs had decreased. But the boy didn't know how people managed to capture her body, and how did he even become a high-level vampire? Aguno explained that Akashi's spirit entered his body through the teeth he found in childhood. And now, in order to stay alive, he would have to constantly drink human blood. But as long as he could keep his power under control, he would be able to avoid drinking human blood for a while. And before starting the task, Agunuo wanted to convince him that he was really ready to help him. He reminded him of his own father and mother, who tried their best to protect him. At the mention of this, he started crying again. Now, Aguno was curious about where he had put his head, but the main character did not want to confess. And so, the man decided not to ask him about it anymore. Meanwhile, the vampire girl returned to her lair. Now, they were thinking about where to strike next time. Coco explained that she did not kill Shang-Shi because it was the only chance to maintain contact with his son. Suddenly, the main one intervened in the conversation. He believed that it was too early to start implementing the plan because they were all not ready for it. Now, he tried to find out how the last operation and attack on people went. The vampires reported their successes. They also told about her comrade who was dead. It was necessary to find the chosen guy, but only Egu Nuo knew about it. Meanwhile, the work continued in the Federation. People tried to develop weapons faster because they understood that a bloody war had already begun. Shang-Yi got angry with the man because the work was not effective. The man with white hair was the deputy head who was injured. But still, the final decision depended only on Shang-Shi, who still held a high position in the Federation. But still, the work on the weapon had to be completed, even if Shang-Shi did not agree with it. The deputy got angry with him, but understood that he could not change anything. Huya tried to contact the boy several times, but since their last meeting, he never answered her. She tried to hold back her tears. After all, they had been quite close friends all their lives. Since childhood, they had spent a lot of time together, and they always gave each other gifts. Her father loved the boy, who was so cute. Their families were friends. As children, they loved spending time together. And they always played with each other. He held her hand and never let go. That day was special. After all, it was her birthday. They were going to return to her father's room, who had promised to give them a gift. But when they entered the room, they were scared and could not move. After all, there were 2 bodies of dead people in the room. The boy tried to understand why the bloody war had lasted so long. In addition, he was amazed that he was able to defeat a vampire who was of a high level so easily. But why then had he not been able to activate his power when he fought his own father? He understood that if the spirit of Akashi was in his blood, then he had incredible power and was truly one of the strongest vampires. Suddenly, he saw that Huya was calling him. From the body of his previous master, he began to remember the girl. So he decided to pick up the phone. The girl was happy when he picked up the phone, but at the same time, she was very scared. Huya tried to find out what happened to him and where he was now. The guy answered coldly and asked what happened. However, the girl wanted to talk to him because she had something to say. The guy couldn't stand it. He dropped the phone. A lot of memories appeared in his head and he tried not to think about it. But he couldn't stop thinking about her. It seemed like his head was going to explode now. It hurt a lot. Huya was scared and started crying. Meanwhile, Coco decided to meet Agunuo. She wanted to know if he had managed to convince the protagonist to side with them. She was also annoyed that he had thought for too long. However, it was very strange that the protagonist's power did not work in the presence of his own father. But, he agreed, so they had to take advantage of it and move on. Coco was satisfied and couldn't wait for them to finally meet Akashi. However, Agunwo disappointed her because he replied that the protagonist was not ready to complete the task yet. After all, he had a lot to learn and he was not ready yet. Meanwhile, Yueshi understood that having the memories of two people at the same time was very difficult. Now he was going to return to the place where he left his head, so that they couldn't find her. He hid her and put her in one of the boxes, of which there were a lot. In addition, it was there that he hid the body of the dead guy. But when he opened the coffin with the body, he was very scared. After all, his head simply disappeared. It wasn't there. Meanwhile, the girl thought about it and found out that since the day they last met, he hadn't returned home. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice. She saw a guy who was scared and in a hurry somewhere. The guy was angry and tried to remember and understand where his head could have gone. But suddenly he realized that someone was next to him. It was Huya who came up to him. The guy was not ready for this meeting, and when he saw her, he was very confused. He was so scared that he could not say a word. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Huya asked where he had been and why he had ignored her for so long. And suddenly, she told him about how his parents were worried because he did not come home. Because of the memories, his head started to hurt again and he screamed. He remembered the day from his childhood when he found her parents dead. Huya held back tears because she did not understand what was happening to him. The main character understood that now was not the time to panic, and he needed to calm down and pull himself together. At the same time, he did not stop thinking about his head and thought that someone could have stolen it. The guy fell to the ground and Huya began to scream at him. Now he felt that he was hungry and really wanted human blood. She ran for water and promised to return. The guy understood that she should not find out who he really was. And when she left, he witnessed a man on the street attacking a woman. He forcibly took her blood. After that, he beat her and poured fresh blood into a glass and drank its entire contents in one gulp. After that, the glass fell to the ground and simply broke. The main character tried to restrain himself and not vomit after what he saw. When the man noticed him, he called him an idiot. The stranger thought that he was laughing at him, so the man immediately began to threaten him. The woman silently watched him and hoped that he would be able to save her. However, the hero could not come to his senses and calm down after what he saw. He asked the man to leave him, but on the contrary, he got angry and came even closer. It was at this moment that the guy felt that he could no longer restrain himself and control himself. Only now did the man understand who was really in front of him and regret his act. It was too late, because now Shu Chen turned into a vampire. Seeing the blood, he became hungry and was about to attack him. And now, taking advantage of the moment he was about to bite him, the man began to scream, but did not have time to defend himself. Shu Chen bit him and began to drink blood, taking his life. He asked the girl to save him, but she stood silently and just watched what was happening. Gradually, life left him and he began to die. At this moment, Huya came and brought him water. But when she saw what had happened, she could not believe her own eyes. In front of her lay a tub from which the hero drank all the blood. And the guy, realizing what had happened, could not hide his involvement. With frightened eyes, he looked straight at her, not understanding what would happen next. Water fell from her hands. The girl began to cry and covered her mouth with her hands to suppress her scream. The hero tried to explain everything, but could not say a single word and just stood silently opposite her. She was angry because he did not tell her anything. After all, he promised to protect her, and now he himself became a threat because he was a vampire. The guy understood that now she became a witness and could betray him. Therefore, he reached for his weapon. The girl did not understand why he did this and embarked on this path. However, he no longer listened and only thought about the fact that he could be exposed and prevented. He took out a sword and was about to strike in order to kill the witness. The guy only replied that the real Shu Chen had been dead for a long time and now he was the new owner of his body. And then he explained that he had killed him in the dark basement last night. In addition, he said that Shu Chen was indeed very brave and was not afraid of him but fought to the very end. But now he was about to strike because he had to kill her. Two personalities were fighting inside him. And suddenly, he stopped. Seeing her tearful face, he remembered everything that connected them and did not dare to do it. However, he understood that it was a necessity. And after asking her for forgiveness, he nevertheless took this desperate step. This was given to him at the cost of incredible efforts. After all, he was fighting with himself. He was getting closer and it was becoming harder and harder for him to do it. And then he realized that he himself had started to cry. She did not understand why he was crying and what made him stop. The girl told about how she constantly tried to call the real Shu Chen and tried to find out what happened to him. But now she knew everything and was sure that he was a hero. And at this time, the vampire realized that he could not control his body and move. He began to remember again. He remembered how, as a child, he had been with her at her parents' funeral. The boy was always with her and tried to comfort her. Being little, she could not understand that she would never see them again and constantly asked when they would return. It was at that moment he promised that he would always protect her. But now he hit her and dealt a fatal blow. And she thanked him for trying to protect her. The guy couldn't believe he had done it, but he couldn't move. And she fell to the ground and started to die. His head started to hurt again and it seemed like it was just going to burst. The woman he saved called a policeman who had already started chasing him. He started to run away because he didn't want to be caught and find out about his secret. Suddenly, he heard the sounds of a shot and realized that a bullet had flown right next to him. The fire was directed from a shotgun. The man who was shooting hit him in the shoulder and seriously wounded him. In front of him was the head of the department himself, who had opened the vampire hunt. After all, he had heard that recently a lot of civilians had died, so he couldn't just sit and do nothing. The other officers told him that they had met this newcomer near the station a few days ago, and his father suggested not to kill him, but to capture him alive. Hearing this, he began to cry because he understood what the man was going to do to him. Suddenly, they felt that something was approaching them. It was a flock of bats that surrounded them and began to circle around them. They flew towards the main character and circled around him. There were so many of them that the officers could not see anything at all. But suddenly, the bats disappeared, and with them, the main character disappeared. The officers did not understand what had happened and why he had managed to disappear. Now they thought and remembered that the body of the missing boy had still not been found. The officers thought that it was the vampires who had tried to steal his body, but what did they need it for? However, the leader considered the problem much more serious and understood that they were on the verge of a big war. His employees promised to carefully review everything and start the investigation again. The leader understood that while he was away, the men could not solve the problems and the work simply stopped. Therefore, he promised to take matters into his own hands and finally start working. In addition, he promised to understand how the vampires managed to infiltrate their office and wanted to prevent it from happening again. Meanwhile, Zhuchen teleported to a safe place. He found himself in the basement and realized that he was bleeding. After all, his wound was serious and he could hardly feel his hand. Suddenly, he saw that his body and the wound began to recover. And after a while, he was completely healthy. There was not even a trace of the wound left on his body. He realized that the power that was in his body could control him. And no matter how hard he tried, he could not take it under his own control. But he had to understand this, otherwise, he simply had no chance to kill his father. It was only obvious that he needed to return Akashi's soul as soon as possible. But first, he had to find a new victim in order to satisfy his hunger. Meanwhile, Chai Yi approached the leader because he had a question. But the man did not want to listen to him because he was busy. He was going to go down to the explosion site and try to find new traces to establish the involvement of vampires in the disappearance of the boy's body. But the man did not understand why this was needed. After all, they had done this several times, and he simply did not understand how it could help. However, time was very short, and right now, they had to find Shu Chen, who had disappeared, as soon as possible. Therefore, everyone had to work as quickly as possible and do everything together. Suddenly, a strange man who was a newcomer entered the room. But the leader did not want to see him. Meanwhile, two new suspects appeared in the investigation, Yue Shi and Shu Chen. The vampires already knew that the Federation knew about the guy who disappeared, and they also learned that he was a vampire and could change bodies. Now they had to prevent the police from finding the guy. Meanwhile, the man kept him at gunpoint and could not understand what was happening. Entering the basement, he saw a huge number of corpses. And the vampire who was looking at him just smiled. It happened right in the police house. So in order to stop him, they tried to release the dogs. A pack of hungry dogs rushed at the man. But he didn't even flinch and didn't seem to be going to run away. After all, he thought that the dogs would listen to him because he was a human. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with a bright red light. This made all the dogs stop, and they seemed to start obeying him. Suddenly, they stopped and rushed at the police officers, who couldn't even understand anything. The vampire took possession of them and seemed to be able to control them. Meanwhile, the officers tried to return to the police station to stop their enemies. They were angry because they didn't foresee the obvious and didn't stop the attack. Just then, they stopped because of a terrible noise that was in front of them. The wall of one of the houses was broken right in front of them. From the rubble, a hungry vampire girl rushed at one of them. With her was another dangerous man with a large hammer. Seeing them, the officers stopped because they had never seen anything like it in their lives. Two of them stayed while the others were supposed to move to the police and protect other people. They were going to attack the vampires from both sides. Wei King was going to strike first. He managed to cut off the vampire's head with one strong blow. He couldn't understand what the vampires really wanted. Crying, he replied to him that in reality, they all wanted freedom. And now, they were attacking people in order to have the opportunity to survive themselves. Meanwhile, the events moved to the police station, where the dogs were killing the officers. The man was so pleased that he didn't even notice how the officers approached him from behind. The leader put a sword to his neck and threatened to kill him. But this did not scare him, because the dogs began to attack them too. The man noticed that his soldiers were really suffering from their bites, but they had no choice but to simply kill the dogs. Suddenly, he noticed how the vampire in front of him turned into a huge bat. Taking advantage of the moment, he simply ran away from him. After all, it was very dangerous and he could not risk his life. But the officer was not going to let him go so easily. Therefore, he was going to use a new weapon. The syringe with poison hit him right in the leg. The bat, who had not had time to fly that far, could not understand what had happened. But the elixir did not work. Chai-Yi could not believe his eyes, because they simply did not have another plan. Suddenly, he heard strange sounds that resembled explosives, and he saw that a bomb had been planted around the entire police station, which was about to explode. "Let's learn to save our soldiers," he ordered everyone to run away. But it was too late, because the explosion had already sounded. The whole house began to collapse. And the man realized that today, a lot of people would die. In another part of the city, the man silently watched what was happening. He was a traitor and in fact a vampire, so he immediately passed the information to the chief. He was glad that finally their evil plan had come to life. The vampire prepared to attack the men and was going to kill them with his great hammer. But the officers were not afraid and were not going to retreat. He managed to dodge the strong and powerful attack, which saved his life. But this was not the end, and the fight did not end there. The giant tried to hit him again and wanted to hit. Now he was ready to counterattack. He managed to push his head through with his sharp sword. He cut his head in two, and that was the end of the confrontation. He shouted at him because he believed that people also deserved freedom and wanted to live freely and peacefully. After that, he cut off his head. Immediately after the fight, he realized that there had been an explosion and the police station had been destroyed. When he returned, he saw the full scale of the disaster, and he could not believe what had happened. He knew that his people could be under the rubble and now their lives were in danger. But they were lucky to stay alive and were going to get to the surface. Many people died that evening, and all of them suffered serious injuries. A huge rock fell on the captain's feet, crushing him, and he could not free himself. But he didn't understand why the elixir didn't work. He was in a lot of pain and was calling people for help. A novice who ran up to him wanted to help and free him. Lifting the stone slab, he realized that it had crushed his legs and he couldn't walk. He called the main office and asked to call an ambulance because there were so many victims. But at first, when he wanted to stop his bleeding, the man asked what his name was. The guy was very surprised and didn't answer his questions. 3 years ago, they were engaged in a special investigation and tried to establish a connection between the vampires and the police station. But when they arrived at the place of work, they unexpectedly stopped. Their attention was attracted by a huge flock of bats flying around them. Their partner was seriously injured, so they wanted to split up and find him faster. They decided to run in different directions and try to surround the entire block to make the search more effective. Suddenly, one of them saw strange traces on the ground. They were traces of blood, and he hoped that they would be able to lead him to the man. So he started moving in their direction in the hope that he would be able to find him soon. But unexpectedly, he realized that the traces of blood suddenly stopped and ended on the wall of one of the houses. Their partner had lost his hands, so he did not understand how he managed to get up the wall. However, he did not notice how the gunpowder ended up right behind him. He was frightened and turned to see who was behind him. And when he saw it, he could not believe his eyes. But now it was too late and he was dead. The vampire who killed him wanted to take his head and disguise himself. After all, this was the only chance to stay in the shadows and get inside the officer's house. However, his clothes were covered in blood, and the same man with white hair appeared before him. The vampire, not expecting to see him, was about to strike. But when he realized who was in front of him, he stopped. After all, there was also a vampire in front of him who was dressed in an officer's uniform. And then he realized that he was not the only one who tried to do this. He gave him the clothes and asked him to use them to make his Moscow more effective. If anyone saw him, they would have huge problems. After giving him the clothes, he simply disappeared because he was very busy and could not waste any more time. At this time, his other partner turned to him and asked about the search results. But the vampire replied that in fact he had found nothing. The boy gave his name. He was the one who found the main character's body. After waiting for the right moment, he was going to kidnap him. Therefore, before the explosion was about to happen, he went down to the basement. There he found his body, which was lying in a bag. The boy carefully picked up his body, which was without a head. It was lying in the coffin, where Yueshir had placed it the day before. Next to it lay the body of an officer, who was also dead. Now he was going to complete the mission and complete the evil plans of the vampires. The father held a photo of his own son in his hands and remembered him as a child. He still hoped that one day he would be able to see him and that everything was fine with him. Suddenly, he heard his voice and could not believe it. Raising his head, he saw his own son in front of him. The mother also could not believe her eyes when she saw her own son in front of her. Meanwhile, in the city, all the residents learned that the vampires had blown up the police station. This meant that the war had already begun because they had struck the first blow. Meanwhile, the vampire boy did not know what to do with the body of the main character. He was going to return the body to his parents, but before that, he wanted to wait a little. He was worried and could not gather himself, so the other officers noticed this and made remarks to him. The captain wanted to search for Shu Chen, who had long disappeared and was now a suspect. He wanted to search his house because there might be some evidence or traces there. Therefore, after a while, he was going to go to his apartment to check everything. Shang-Chi had wanted to do this for a long time, but the management did not give him permission. However, now he could do it. When he entered the house, he realized that the door was open. They were going to enter, so he had to be on guard. Suddenly, he burst into the house and saw the frightened men and a healthy boy there. Also, he noticed that there were no traces of injury on his body, which meant that his wounds had healed. The vampire couldn't believe his own eyes because he saw his dead body. Why did the boy become a vampire, and how did he manage to stay alive? The man prepared to strike and wanted to attack him. His mother started screaming and begging him not to do it. She fell at his feet and begged him not to touch her son, who had just returned. But the man didn't listen to her and ordered the novice to grab him. The boy started to get nervous and couldn't make the right decision. He was going to carry out his order, but the protagonist's father attacked the novice and stopped him. He shouted at his son and asked him to run away because he had bought him some time. The novice tried to break free and grab him, and the man screamed because now people will be punished for covering up for the vampire and letting him escape. However, his mother didn't care. She was ready to do anything to save him. After all, the officers had no right to take her own son away from her. She couldn't accept that her own son would die before her. Shang-Chi tried to persuade his parents and convince them that their son was a criminal, and he had to be detained and killed. Suddenly, the newcomer finally realized who was really in front of him. Suddenly, the main character began to speak and asked for forgiveness from his own family for his act. And when they heard him, they couldn't understand what really happened to him. He felt sorry that he had become a monster, and now they were forced to suffer because of him. Mom realized that he was going to give up so as not to put them in danger, so she started crying again. He thought that he no longer had freedom because he had become a vampire, and it was better for him to just leave. He thanked his parents for taking care of him all the time, and he was proud to have such parents. And at that moment, a lot of bats appeared in the room and he simply disappeared, flying away with them. The novice who was watching what was happening was amazed because he had never seen such abilities. Meanwhile, the events moved to the city hospital, where the wounded commander was undergoing treatment and trying to recover from a leg injury. He was very nervous because he had an ordinary ward, and he wanted to lie in a more luxurious one. However, due to the large number of wounded, this was simply not possible. He was the head of the department, so he believed that he should not be treated like everyone else. His colleague was lying next to him, trying to calm the man down. He tried to find out what really happened to him and why he had suffered so much. However, he did not want to say anything because he was not obliged to talk about it. The man got angry because of such impudence. Having calmed down, he began to think about why the poison did not work on vampires and did not kill him. After all, when the development was underway, there were no errors and all the tests were successful. But he did not know how high-level vampires reacted to the drug. Maybe it did not harm them. The next day, the newcomer went to the same basement where he saw the boy's body. He didn't understand anything and couldn't believe that the boy was alive. He opened the bag with his body. There were no traces. The body was definitely not touched because it was lying in the same position. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice and realized that the guy himself was in front of him. Seeing the newcomer, the main character was very happy because they were old acquaintances and he knew him well. The newcomer was so scared that he took out his sword. He did not believe that in front of him was exactly the one he had been looking for all this time and was ready to fight with him. Suddenly, he began to transform. His commander appeared in front of him, a man with white hair. And now, the newcomer understood who was really in front of him because there were vampires who could change their appearance. Seeing his surprise, the officer realized that his game was indeed very realistic. He didn't think his ability was that impressive, it was just something he used all the time. The novice couldn't understand why he went down to the basement and what he really needed, but he just wanted to make sure that the newcomer would not betray him and their cooperation would be successful. However, he understood that everything was not so simple, because the vampire knew about the body in the basement and could change his face, which meant that now the newcomer was in danger. The vampire tried to explain his behavior. After all, he saw that he was scared and he wanted to calm him down in order to continue working further. As for the basement and the body theft, he had thought it all up and planned it long before it happened. Therefore, he knew about everything from the very beginning and made sure that everything went smoothly.